Brilyn Hollyhand. Hey, Brilyn, good to see you in person.
Joey, happy Tuesday. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be in Montgomery.
Happy Tuesday. So what brings you to Montgomery?
Well, I'm just here today. We've been in the State House. I try to come once a session and meet with some of our legislatures. So I just wrapped up a meeting with Lieutenant Governor Ainsworth. We were with Cynthia Almond before then, Gerald Allen before that. We had lunch with Garland Gudger and met with some of our caucus friends and had a great time. So really appreciate them and the support. Today's meetings were just about making sure that my generation gets a seat at the table going forward. And they were very receptive to that. The Lieutenant Governor was very, very receptive to making sure that going forward in the state of Alabama, that our generation gets a seat. I'll be voting for the first time this November. And so that's pretty cool to get to talk to them about that and all the things that are coming up in this session. So busy time to be in Montgomery, but excited to talk to you.
And so for folks who don't know, you're 17?
17.
Yes, and you have an executive position in what, the Youth Advisory Council for the GOP?
I'm the co-chair of the RNC's inaugural Youth Advisory Council.
Oh, so how do you end up in something like that?
Yeah, so it started after the 2022 midterms. I was a little disappointed in how the Republicans performed in that election thought that there was a problem. And a lot of fingers are being pointed, a lot of blame was being thrown around about what was the problem. Was it our candidates? Was it who was endorsing the candidates? Was it the way that we were addressing issues? What was it? And Joey, to be honest, I didn't think it was any of those issues. I thought it was simply our lack of engagement with my generation. And so in January, I wrote this long-form op-ed titled "The GOP Must Address the Elephant in the Room, Gen Z." And it immediately got on Fox News the next morning, made national news, kind of went viral. And I got a call from the RNC chairwoman, and I talk about this in my book in the first chapter. And I'd never been reached out to by the RNC. I didn't really know where this was going. I was a little scared. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm about to get blacklisted. Like, I just called the party out. Now I have a meeting with the chairwoman. It's kind of getting like called into the principal's office from my perspective in high school.
Right.
Like, this isn't going to go well. And the meeting actually was very well. She said, look, I agree with you. We do have a problem. We have lacked in this area. What can we do? And I said, well, look, the DNC founded a youth council in 2005. We're almost 20 years behind them. Let's at least found a council, bring Gen Z to the table. Joey, there was one problem. There was no table for Gen Z to sit at. They had not made a youth council yet. So we had to build a table, and then we brought Gen Z to it, and that's what we've been doing. We've been traveling to college campuses, and now we're meeting with legislators. We're trying to get some stuff passed, and appreciate you.
Now, I've heard Gen Z characterized as sometimes they can be a little... in politics, let's just say, nihilist about our institutions. Like they kind of see through the BS, for lack of a better term. Yet Gen Z also strikes me as much more self-starting than, say, the millennial generation.
Absolutely.
So can you speak to that odd mix of, it seems like they're very wise. They grew up with the internet, Gen Z did. And yet they're not just kind of sitting and complaining. Y'all are actually getting stuff done.
They are, and we actually want to do stuff. So we've been traveling to college campuses over the past year, and every single college campus I've been to, Republican or Democrat, regardless of what the student is, their background that comes up to me, they say there's clearly a problem in our country. There's clearly something we need to fix. Let's fix it. And so we can agree, we can have some common ground. Obviously, we disagree on some of the more divisive issues, but we can find common ground to come together and say, the guy that's in the Oval Office right now has got to go. They might have a solution where they think a more, liberal person needs to be there. We obviously think a more conservative person needs to be there, but we can agree that we need to get him out to start with. Right. And so that's where we start registry voters. The big thing right now is college students, specifically conservatives, haven't famously been registered to vote before. We need to make sure they're registered to vote. We need to be getting specifically to young people. Listen, Joey, I've got breaking news for you. Joe Biden is losing young
Joey
people.
Too.
Yeah.
He's losing young
You're
people.
Getting great young people. But Joe Biden is losing young people. And this is our chance for the first time in decades for the Republican Party to win the youth vote. That's huge. That's monumental. That's historic. We have a shot, but we have to work for it. And it starts by registering people. So that's what we've been doing because, to your point, they realize they see through the BS, as you said. We need to get them on our side. We need to get them registered, and that's what we're doing.
So it's a part reaching out, just talking to folks, but also creating sort of the infrastructure to get out the vote.
That's the hard part, but yes.
Are you still allowed to throw a kegger or something at colleges to get people to show up?
We haven't tried that yet, but we did develop a program called Bank Your Vote, where you can go online to bankyourvote.com. There's state-specific websites, and it's really simple. This is actually one of my favorite things we've gotten to do this year. You put your first name, your last name, your phone number, and your zip code. That's it. You will not hear from us till it's time to, for the deadlines to come up. So when it's deadline for absentee ballot, when it's deadline for voter registration, we'll reach out to you and say, hey, we know you've got a lot of college classes going on. We know you've got exams going on. We just want to remind you, you have, 2 weeks left to make sure you get your vote cast. You have 2 weeks left to make sure you register to vote. Our college students are not aware of that. They're not keeping up with that because they're busy with everything else. So that's that thing of making it accessible and setting a reminder. So I think Bank Your Vote is historic. I think it'll be monumental as we go into this election season. Hopefully we see good results.
Now, I'm kind of proud of myself, I guess. I've interviewed a lot of folks, including yourself, Brilyn. But
Thank you.
I believe, did you not have the opportunity to actually interview Trump?
I've not yet. I've
Not
met
yet.
with him. Met
Met
him. Yes,
with
we
him.
talked about that last time. Yes.
Yeah, but what is it like actually
Yeah.
meeting the man in
It's
person?
really cool. You know, I've met with him 3 separate times now, and
Yeah.
the most recent time was here in Alabama. It was the night that I was on your show, and when he came for that nice little state party fundraiser.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, and we met before his speech, and he said, you know, what can we do to help with the youth fund? And he's actually interested because he loves to have different experts around him and get different opinions. And I said, well, sir, first of all, we got to start reaching out because there's been no reach out in the past. And obviously, he knows social media well. A lot of our other friends are politicians that are a little older in age. It's difficult to tell them that social media reaches people. Donald Trump knows that better than I do. So the second I say, let's reach him through social media, his mind starts turning, well, how can we do that? And I said, well, you know, Truth Social's great. Let's get on Instagram. Let's get on some other networks that young people actually are on. 2 weeks after that conversation, he rejoined Instagram. So I can't take credit for it, but at least he's listening. And that's a good thing to have from your top of the ticket nominee. He listens. He wants to ask you questions. He wants to be in the know. He loves experts around him. So it was really cool to have that conversation. I did make some Alabama football jokes. You know, he's a big sports fan. And to the end of our conversation, I was like, you got to come back to Tuscaloosa. We're doing a debate pretty soon. And if you want to come to a football game, we'd love to have you too. He didn't come to game. He didn't come to debate, but there's a whole nother season coming up before with a new coach that he might be interested in. So we might see him back in Bryant-Denny soon. So.
Yeah, and he got a great reception. I think he'll get another
he
one.
He loves the state innovation, so he gets a free one in Bryant-Denny.
And there's something about when he connects with, like, say, the sports crowd. Like, I don't know if you've seen those videos where he walks into a UFC event.
Yes.
But it's just unreal. It's like a 70,000-man army ready to go. Yes. And there's something about Trump, even though, he's almost 80-something, if he isn't already. So, but he still connects, I think, with folks across generations, and a lot of folks you wouldn't suspect, like the billionaire who's famous for, like, you know, gold plating things is actually connecting with everyday working folks. And I think it's well, the joke I often use, I steal it from George Carlin. He said this about Bill Clinton. And one guy says to the other, that Bill Clinton is full of crap. And the other guy says back, yeah, but at least he's honest about it. There's a certain element to where Trump does that hyperbolic advertising, and I think it really it plays into people. Now, you have a new book coming out. When is it coming out again?
July 9th. It's available for pre-order now. They're at brylynbook.com. Signed copies are on there. It's also available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever you get your books. One Generation Away is officially available for pre-order, and we get to talk about it, so I'm excited about that.
So One Generation Away, and we've already talked about this a little bit, but you know, I've continued the conversation on these airwaves. I think we're almost in a spiritual moment. So are you seeing that on college campuses? And I mean, I've seen some of the events at Auburn and Alabama were mass baptisms, but even short of that, it seems like even the, say, secular, the people searching are speaking in more spiritual terms these days.
Absolutely. And since the last time we've talked about this, they had that mass baptism on UA's campus. I was there. They had 6,000 students in Coleman Coliseum, which is amazing to have 6,000 students on a Wednesday night. Be like, oh wow, like I'm gonna actually go to a worship event and worship. That was amazing. But what was even more amazing was to see 250 students get baptized after that, to say I'm gonna make that actual public commitment of my faith. That was incredible. The last time you and I spoke a few weeks ago, I said that the middle section of my book was called The Modern Day F Words: Faith, Family, and Freedom. And I told you I got a little bit of pushback from some of my team. They're like, you can't call it The Modern Day F Words. This is a book. Like, all the old people are like, that's crazy. You can't do that. You're gonna freak everybody out. And I was like, no. Listen. Faith, family, freedom are all taboo in modern day America. They're all under attack. Why? Because that's what the left hates the most. They hate faith, they hate family, they hate freedom. And that's what we need to bring back. If we want a revival in this nation, it starts with faith, absolutely. And we back that up by strong families. And we back that up with having the freedom to worship God. So people were like, how can you tie these revivals that are going on back into your book? I can do it simply by saying that we have to have a revival. It cannot happen if we don't have faith, if we don't have strong families, if we don't have freedom. Because if we don't have freedom, we can't worship God. We will not have a free America for my generation and generations to follow me to grow up in. It's so important, and I appreciate you giving time to stuff like that.
Of course, and well, yesterday we played a clip of all people. The author of The God Delusion, Richard Dawkins, was calling himself a cultural Christian in a recent interview.
Wow.
And some say he's been saying stuff like that for years, but like he's saying it now explicitly. He's still, I mean, I still don't believe, but it's like, why are you saying this now, Richard? Like it is an odd time where I think we're reassessing first principles, reassessing our foundations. Now, as you travel around the country, you're going nationwide, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Are you seeing like certain places that nothing's a lost cause, but like you've been to the UC Berkeley campus, for instance?
They've not invited me, Joey, to no surprise.
Right.
I'm not invited to Berkeley yet.
So like, I'm wondering one change that could happen to this country, because there's the formal centers of power in politics, elected officials and whatnot, but there's these informal systems, say in corporate media and in the university system. And one change that could be huge is, I know we're going to have Caroline Dobson on here in a second. She went to Harvard, and you hear Harvard and you're like, okay, smart woman here. But I think there's also folks these days who go, oh, Harvard. Ugh. So you're one of those little weird, blue-haired types. And do you think that change of reputation of our major institutions, though it hurts to see people lacking trust, does that change lead to something good?
It can. It can, because I think people will grow frustrated at some point. I think we see, obviously, I'll give a shout out to Auburn's campus. This is coming from Tuscaloosa boy, but Auburn has one of the most organized Turning Point USA and CR chapters in the nation. They've won an award last year for one of the most organized. It's incredible. So they're doing a great job. Obviously, Auburn, a pretty famously conservative campus. I'm not too concerned about there. We go to other campuses. I haven't been to Berkeley yet, but I've been to some close. And we go to some of our more liberal campuses, more liberal states, obviously get a little bit of pushback and criticism. But like I told you at the beginning, we even have liberals who voted for Joe Biden, or their parents voted for Joe Biden, and they see that there's trouble in the country, not just the economy, but at the southern border with what's going on everywhere. They see that there's issues. They want to change that. So I think there'll be a level of frustration that grows at some point, that people start boycotting this movement that the left has built with these campuses. And you'll like this. The first chapter of the book's called The Birth of the American Teenager. Okay. It talks about kind of how it's kind of a history. My history nerd comes out in that section. We kind of give you a history lesson in chapter 1. Chapter 2, or section 2, we kind of talk about what's going on, and then section 3 is my favorite because we give a roadmap to success going forward for the party and the nation. But in chapter 2, it specifically talks about Marxism and how it got into the education system, because that's where it seeped in. When we had the hippie movement come in and the Marxist teachers and professors came into education, they've been there ever since, and they've been indoctrinating our children. And that's why this book's important. This book, my debut book, One Generation Away, is for my generation. It's for my peers that are concerned about what's going on in the country, that don't think that there's going to be a free America for them to grow up in. But it's also for parents that see the indoctrination that's going on in their kids' classrooms, that are fed up with this and won't change. They want to stop and push back against indoctrination. And third, it's for grandparents. Grandparents that want to teach their children and grandchildren about conservatism, but they don't know how. It's difficult. It's very hard to talk about this stuff, right. Joey. This book's for everybody. That's why I encourage your audience to go pre-order it, One Generation Away on BrilynBook.com, because we've got to get to them and we can start changing the campus. You're absolutely right. It starts on campuses, then it goes into the homes.
Now, as you meet, I imagine you're also doing a lot of media, yes. And I do not say anything about me, but I mean, like when you talk to rising stars in media, yourself included, who really has impressed? Like you're like blown away by a particular rising star, usually a younger person.
So yesterday, that's only been yesterday. Wow, it's only Tuesday. I did a media day. We had about 10, 12 different interviews back to back. Some were radio, some were podcasts. We booked all the people that have reached out into one day because I was off of school for Easter Monday. And I did an interview with this 15-year-old, and it was really cool. He has this up-and-coming podcast. His name's Gabe, and I'm going to be sharing his interview in a second on my social medias, and it was really fun. It was a 30-minute conversation. He went in depth. He had like 12 prepared questions for me, right. And it wasn't like what Joe Biden gets. It wasn't what's your favorite ice cream flavor. Right. It was, why did you go into this area at this time? Why do you think the book's necessary because of what could happen here? Do you really think revival is possible? How could we do that? Not just is Trump going to win in November? Like it's right. How does Trump win? What can we do to make sure that things happen after Trump's election? And so he was very into it. I really, it was so cool to see other young people. And I shared that story later on in another interview, and the guy was like, "Oh, is that not competition? Like, do you not like view that?" I was like, "Absolutely not." Like, I was like, it made my day. I was so inspired to see Gabe and other young people stand up and speak out. And so that's what kind of keeps me going, by seeing people coming. My favorite thing is having people come up at college campuses and they're like, "Hey, because of you, I started simply posting stuff on my Instagram story. I might have lost followers, I might have lost friends, but I spoke my mind on my Instagram story and I won some people over, and it worked out in the process." That's inspiring. That's why we keep going. That's what we hope to see.
Now, the end with because you said you're really into history.
Yes.
Number one, I would recommend, if you haven't read him already, Arthur Herman. He's been a guest on the show. I think he's still in National Security Council. But awesome. The two I would recommend are his first one. It's a little crunchy, a little dense, but it's The Idea of Decline in Western History. Okay. And so he lays out all the different left-wing and right-wing ideologies that popped up that said, "Oh, the West is done. We're done. We've lost our soul," so to speak. And he lays out how, no, actually, whether it's the Unabomber, Al Gore, or Spengler in Germany, all these people were wrong. We keep defying that. And then I'd also recommend his book, The Cave in the Light, which is a history of the West through the lens of Plato versus Aristotle. It's a freaking brilliant book. And he has a bunch of others. He's a Pulitzer finalist. Really great guy, but I'd imagine you're going to study history when you're going to college. What sort of area do you already have sort of a itch to look more into?
The lieutenant governor just asked me that question in our meeting. That's a great question. So I'm currently taking AP US history right now. It's my favorite class I've ever taken, and it's not one of those that I'm bored by. Like, it's always interesting. I'm always learning something else. There's all these like tiny little minute details that really played such a huge part in history and how we're still a nation. This great experiment that's America is still a nation nearly 250 years later. It's incredible. So I'm thinking about, we'll look into maybe some type of political science degree, maybe something in business, just to kind of keep generic, but also looking at, I've talked about maybe a major in history and just see where that goes. I know some of the history departments in the state are a little bit more liberal.
Yeah.
And so we'll have to see how that route goes, but that's totally something I'll explore. And particularly in that first section of the book, I don't want your readers to get bored or skip over it, but that's where my history nerd comes out. And that's where we're kind of like, the question I get, I know you get it a lot too, is how did we get where we are?
Right.
What happened? What went wrong? We lay all of it out. We start in, the early 1900s and go up, obviously 6 season hippie revolution, then get to modern day and say, these are specific things that went wrong that turned the country the way we are today. Here's how we reverse them. And that's why I think it's so important. This is a recipe to save America. It's nothing else. We're not trying to scare people away. We're trying to say that there's still hope, that there is still an American dream. I had somebody in Media Day yesterday say, oh, well, there's not an American dream. Well, stop telling people that. I'm living proof of that, Joey. I'm the 17-year-old political commentator with a book that's about to hit bookshelves across the country in July. That's crazy. That's unheard of. That doesn't happen anywhere else. That is the American dream, and we need to remind everybody of that.
Well, I appreciate your time today. And yeah, I could sit here and talk history with you for a while. I just started Will Durant's Age of Faith.
Yes.
I realized, okay, I know the Greeks and Romans fairly well, but it starts to get blurry around the medieval times. And it's just, the more I read it, the more I figure out that, man, there are good guys and bad guys, but it's also a lot of very flawed people, even the best guys.
Yes.
And it reminds you to have hope, because looking backwards, sometimes I think we do too much of a moral melodrama with our history, and don't see the actual people. And they're just as flawed as we are, I'll put it that way. And yet they did amazing things. And it is amazing to see you rising up. And appreciate your time, and would love to have you back anytime you're interested.
Yes. Thank you for having me, Joey. Have a great week. Hope you had a great Easter, and appreciate your continued support.
Happy Easter, sir.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.
Broadcasting from the Riverside Chevrolet Master Control Center, this is WACV Cusana, News Talk 93.1 FM. When it's Chevy, it's Riverside.